Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. Caught a little bit off guard there by the question and answers ending, but we hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. But now that you know the players a little bit better, it's time to dive in. We have our first match of the day, posesi versus Kin. It has been a pretty strong performance overall, I would say, from our two newcomers in the first few weeks. We've seen them both a couple of times. Kin, one of the few players, along with Glory, to make top 8 every single week, actually. He's been doing very, very well indeed, which I'm very much unsurprised by. I think, you've been saying that you've known how powerful he is for a very, very long time indeed, after he is now, back in the day was a Hearthstone gold medalist, I believe, at the Asian Indoor Games.
That event had a power outage in the middle of it at the Asian Games, but Kin still managed to power through. I think it was a ton of Mechathune decks on the other side, but he just, I don't know, as early as then, I was very impressed with his play. And now, all the way through to his third week in the top 8, I would not be surprised to see him go all the way, especially with a priest left up, which we think is a little bit strange.
Yeah, I agree. I think for two reasons. First of all, Priest is just looking really strong at the moment. It's been the couple of times we've seen it so far that it's been left unbanned. It just hasn't even looked close. It's absolutely dominated. And also, I feel like this is the exact type of deck that Kin thrives on. If you think back to his win at Masters Tour Bucharest last year, that was a very slow, very controlling metagame, especially when you got up to the top 8 and top 4. If you think about Eddie's win with his very slow controlling decks as well. And so leaving up the Resurrect Priest for Kin feels like a dangerous strategy. Maybe he's just as strong with the aggro decks, but he prefers the control decks. But I'd have to say, if you're going to give him any of his strengths, that's potentially one I wouldn't go for.
I would definitely agree, but we will worry about the priest later because we did get word that the first matchup will be the Shaman mirror. We've seen a whole lot of Paladin mirrors and Paladin versus Shaman, but I don't think we've seen all too many Shaman mirrors throughout the weekend.
Yeah, it could be an interesting one. How does this matchup break down? What's the kind of general game plan that you're trying to do with Totem Shaman, Gia?
Well, as it seems to be compared to all the other matchups, it's really similar, just with that whole game plan of trying to stick a totem. So I think a big important factor will be the first player that's able to land an attack buff to actually get a value trade. Say you play an evil totem, your opponent plays their evil totem. If you could play even just a totemic surge on one minion, I think that would be absolutely relevant. I would even go so far as to compare it to the old combo priest mirror in that regard.
Yeah, I was actually just about to make the same comparison. It feels like that kind of pattern re-emerges time and time again. Even with the current warrior mirrors, you hear a lot of whisperings amongst the players that the first rampage just wins the game, because getting that attack buff and value trading is so important. Maybe we'll play totemic reflections, not even on a totem, just to buff up the minion and keep value trading. But either way, for this starting hand, I like Kin getting rid of all those cards. I think you're looking, like you said, for totemic reflections, but also just the one drop, the powerful one drops that you can use to absolutely lock down the board quick as.
Yes, you talk a lot about the one drops because this is the kind of newer version, which is including things like Blazing Battle Mage, etc., and also even a Shield Bearer in the case of Kin's list. Yeah. I will say though, I kind of prefer the version that Glory was bringing, which included Magic Carpet, and I think was a huge factor for his success because the Magic Carpet helps you respond so well in a deck that normally doesn't have very many comeback mechanisms.
I can definitely inclusion. However, in this particular game for Kin, even though it has no attack value at the start, this Shield Bearer is looking insane. Coin Flame Tongue Totem completely denies the play of Totemic Reflections on turn 3 from posesi, and then he can follow up in the ideal scenario with Mana Tide into Splitting Axe for a board full of totems. It's looking nuts.
Yeah, it is the ideal scenario, but we can see from posesi there that he has got one of the few removal spells available to Shaman. New card, Serpent Shrine Portal, really powerful, kind of like a mini flanking strike from Hunter back in the day. And one begets the other. You flanking the flanking. That's just a play we've seen before.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Ouroboros, the serpent eating itself there with the two serpent shrines. And it's still, the curve works out pretty well here. Obviously, Kin is going to be a little bit scared now. That's obviously a totem that looks like it's going to stick on the board, threatening the totemic reflections, threatening the splitting axe. But I think he kind of just has to ignore it and start developing his own game plan.
Yeah, this is probably the first very difficult turn, and you see the players have been going lightning fast at these aggro matchups because a lot of it is the fundamentals. And if you've been playing Hearthstone for a long time, you can probably already put two and two together about the best early game plays. However, for Kin here, if he wants to clear off that evil totem, he's got to take a trade and play the lightning bolt, which I agree is probably too many resources invested. Then again, the div was just developing another 0 attack minion, and the 2/3 splitting axe wouldn't actually copy anything there. So Kin with the respect.
It's a really difficult dynamic because if the totemic reflections had come down, it would have been devastating for Kin. So I can understand why he would go for this line of play. You kind of have to play around such a powerful card your opponent would always look for.
Of powerful cards, we've seen Splitting Axe played a lot this weekend, but not in its powerful form. Played mostly just as a 4-mana 3/2 weapon. But Kin here with the Lightning Bolt doesn't have to resort to that yet. Every single value trade taken in this matchup is a small victory because single minion sticking just gives you so much advantage. So now Kin is protecting the Mana Tide behind the Shield Bearer, can possibly copy it next turn.
And I will say that overall, I actually, despite it being lightning fast from these players, I like a lot of what I'm seeing here. I think that even though Kin could have gone for the other game plan of just ignoring the evil totem, which might have worked out better in this instance, on average, I think he made the best play for sure by playing around the splitting axe and the totemic reflections. And now he's managed to get himself in a position where he is able to get the splitting axe down. And while it's not especially powerful in terms of board development, these card draws are exactly what he needs.
Yeah, the card draw could be huge, but I think very well recognized from Glory that he is now the aggressor since he's not able to answer the mana. From posesi. And the overload from last turn didn't quite let him get the ideal, but now Splitting Axe is going to be able to copy at least one totem. The healing is pretty relevant here.
Very relevant. This is an incredibly close dynamic. Posesi is unable to clear off both of the totems, which is such a big difference here. I cannot overstate how important that is. Kin is now able to go, if he wants to, Totemic Reflections and Splitting Axe on the same turn. That's got to be GG, right?
It is, but I think Posesi took a very, very important decision just there, whether he wanted to clear off the 2/2 with a weapon, preserve that one lackey. Any minion sticking is relevant here, but that would mean that both Mana Tide stick at the end of the turn. So I think he took the correct line of play, which is to just clear off as many minions as possible.
Good point.
And hope that Kin can't get the utmost value off of all of these cards.
So yesterday in the match versus Frosty, we saw Mana Tide being played 4 times, almost resulting in fatiguing to death. Is that ever a consideration here?
I would say a resounding no, because that matchup against Frosty, Frosty had, like his name would suggest, a whole bunch of Frost Novas and Rays of Frost, and even Malagos's Frost Nova, and it didn't even quite get there in the end versus Blitzchung. But Posesi's just gonna give it up because he knows he's fallen too far behind.
Very, very fast series, and there's a lot to analyze in those matchups. The Paladin, I feel like, can be a little bit basic in terms of how you're fighting for board with the Murlocs, but the Totem Shaman I actually think is quite an interesting deck and has a lot of very cool matchups. Some of them are just blowouts, but that one, there was a lot of back and forth. Kin in particular, I feel like had a lot of different lines where he could have ignored Posesi's board and instead developed his own game plan a little bit quicker. But instead, he decided to go on the reactive a little bit in the early game to play around any potential for totemic reflections. And even though it wasn't there, it still worked out really well for him.
I feel like quoting a book here, Derek, which it's a young adult novel, The Fault in Our Stars. There's a line where John Green compares falling in love to falling asleep, which is slowly and then all at once, which is what I like to call that matchup as well. Because it's a lot of slow incremental trades in the beginning, but one Banatide stuck and then he just won all at once. Could have gone the other way just as easily. If, for example, Posesi had drawn an earlier answer for the Shield Bearer, then maybe he would have also been able to clear off the Manatide, and then suddenly all of Kin's cards would have done nothing. So it's really just all about sticking that one minion.
Wow, that is an incredibly long and staggeringly specific quote to put in your young adult novel about this week of Hearthstone Grandmasters. I didn't know that John Green was such a prophet. But that does mean that with our first game out of the way, we're going to have to jump to a quick break to let the players get ready for the next game. So we'll be right back with the conclusion of this series after this.
If I would have a t-shirt with only one word and wear it an entire year, I think the word would be
just one word.
I will put happiness on my t-shirt.
I think it would just be okay.
Hi.
If I had to wear a t-shirt with only one word, I think it would be Solari.
Happy.
Argue for more self-promotion, because why not?
Clown. Because that's just me.
Hearthstone.
Man,
What? No? Okay, there we go. That word would be man. The word,
Money. Money, yeah.
The word that would be on my t-shirt is smile.
don't worry.
One word?
One word? Oh. I'll go again.
If I had to be handcuffed to another Grandmaster for an entire month,
Maybe I should choose someone I don't like and annoy them.
I'd want it to be someone that doesn't really do a lot, so they wouldn't be like in the way, causing a lot of problems.
Well, the thing is, I already live with Muzzy, so it really kind of feels like we're handcuffed in a way. Things wouldn't be too different, except for bathroom breaks.
It would probably be Pavel. Pavel's pretty skinny, you know, I can move him around and just go wherever I want.
I'd probably choose Bunny Hopper. I've spent the most time with Bunny Hopper recently, and we get along pretty well.
Princey, probably. He's my best friend here.
It would probably be Zalea. A large problem would be food, and Zalea knows how to find the cheese. So just being handcuffed to Zalea would allow me probably to have more access to more cheese. Is Zalea obsessed with cheese? Yes. It's a problem.
I think it would have to be Eddie. He's a good guy.
Papa Jason, because he is a vegan, and so whenever we go out and have food, I can have all the meat, and he'll just have all the veggies that I don't like to eat.
I'd pick Papa Jason. He's very positive, and I don't think I'd get annoyed being around him. I think with some of the other GMs, they might start to get to me after a while.
You know, you're not the first person that said that. The other people said because he's a vegan, so.
Oh, because he's vegan? Oh, because I get all the meat? Well, that's a way more clever answer. Use that, just put my voice instead.
Welcome back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. Sorry about that slightly longer delay. We're all set now, though, and ready to jump into the remainder of this series. And once again, our two newcoming Grandmasters, Kin and posesi. Very convincing win in the first game by Kin in the Shaman mirror, which of course means now, given that we are effectively playing Conquest but with one extra deck, he cannot queue the Shaman again. So now he's left with what I believe is his trump card, his strongest deck in the Priest that he could just throw down, and I believe probably win a game whenever he does that. Obviously not guaranteed, nothing's 100% in Hearthstone, but it definitely feels to me like that's the strongest of his remaining decks.
For sure. It's his closest to a meta deck that's remaining, because I'm just going to say that based on the stats, Druid has fallen off. But yeah, I do expect Kin to get a win with that versus the remaining aggro decks from posesi, but maybe it struggles a little bit against Mage. But Kin, my man, going for the Druid. Love to see it.
Yeah, I think this makes sense. If I had to wager a guess at his strategy, I would say, given he has 4 decks and only has to win with 3 of them, Paladin will probably be the deck that he opts to not play. And will instead go for the Druid, and if he wins this, then the Priest. And although the overall stats based on all the regions would indicate that posesi should be in the lead here, at least in Asia-Pacific, Gia, your analysis has been just right on, that even though Druid should be weak to these aggro decks, it's just kind of more powerful. It's just doing more broken stuff pretty quickly.
That's the best way of putting it. You just play cards like Glowfly Swarm, Exotic Mount Seller, and you can ramp up to those really quickly. Fungal Fortunes is a big one. It just seems like if you look at each individual card included in the deck, Druid just has more powerful stuff. And with this draw off the top of Innervate, this looks exactly like what Glory was going for in a similar matchup the other day.
It really does. And Kin, I imagine, was playing to probably not this exact scenario specifically, but it was something he would have had in mind. Keeping the Rising Winds on the mulligan, it's not typically a card that I would say you're looking for. I would rather find the Overgrowth, maybe a Crystal Power versus aggro, obviously Fungal Fortunes, as you mentioned. But against specifically Totem Shaman, look at how devastating this is for posesi.
It absolutely is. Even with the Totemic Might committed, Kin can clear this off with just a trade and hero power, and that immediately shuts down Shaman game plan. And it's so tempting to go for the Fungal Fortunes here, but I think Kin knows what's up. He knows this matchup. And you know what? I'm just going to say it right here. Maybe Asia-Pacific has a good win rate with Druid because they've been mulliganing for this type of game plan.
Maybe. It's, I feel like the Asia-Pacific has the reputation of being a little bit behind the curve compared to the other regions. They tend to, the metagame catches up a week later, but obviously this is a brand new metagame, and Kin bringing something new to the table here. I think, like you said, may have just been playing the matchup that little bit better.
Not just on Kin's end as well. We've seen it from Blitzchung, we've seen it from Glory. Druid, I don't know if it's lost a single game in APAC this weekend, and the Iron Bark off the top, I think, was an absolutely great draw here for Kin. Even though it's not really expending all of his mana, just gaining the health on the minion, making sure that it doesn't die to some trades up from posesi. But Serpentine off the top is huge as well. Maybe Kin has to shift off of the board game plan now.
I think I agree. There's the fact that he can make 2 eagles, as he has run through this entire thought process in 2 seconds, it appears. I was going to say it lines up fairly well against what's on board, unless there's specifically exactly another Serpent Shrine. Because posesi's a mana off of the Splitting Axe, so removal is a little bit lackluster at the moment. But even having said that, the second Beaming Sidekick just puts a terrible spin on this for Kin. He's now massively behind.
It's not even exactly Serpent Shrine, right? It's the other sidekicks. It's also the even Totemic Reflection on a non-totem, just to take a value trade, I think would kind of dampen that game plan. So now Kin, I think, is rightfully going to pivot a little bit here. He's got the Glowfly for next turn, but with that spell used, there's only going to be 4 in hand that we can see, possibly 5 going off the top. Not terrible. Another Serpent Shrine, my goodness.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward this turn because I think the main thing that posesi wants to set up is Mana Tide into Splitting Axe with a Storm's Wrath, either on this turn or the next turn. The problem, of course, with that is board space in this instance. And therefore, maybe we see him deliberately trading away some of his minions to make room on the board.
I'd like to see Storm's Wrath committed this turn because Kin is actually playing 1 copy of Starfall in his Druid, which seems to line up very well against posesi's
Very good point.
So gonna go for it as early as now. He can still just play the Axe next turn, and most likely something's gonna stick.
Yeah, exactly. He gets the full suite of copies as well on the Mana Tide and the spell damage. It just works beautifully here.
All right, so Glowfly seems like the immediate play that jumps out to me. Kin, with a shake of his head, actually just gonna go for the Overflow here.
Wow.
It heals up posesi's board, but this probably gives him his best chance of coming back with a big swing off Exotic Mount Seller, but not a single. Not a single Bog Beam or the other Innervate picked up, or the other Iron. And he even tosses the Moonfire there just to make hand space.
This is an absolute disaster, GM.
Point to you, Derek.
I don't feel like a winner on this one. I just feel bad for Kin on this one. Obviously, you know, congrats to posesi. Hasn't won yet. There is still the potential in this Druid deck to come back from even the most unlikely of scenarios. But this is starting to look a bit scary.
That's a good draw off the top, but I feel like the only way back in now is, even with the Diving Griffin, doesn't get there against Bloodlust.
I think it's just pray they don't have Bloodlust is the game plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they're already showing 14 on board, are they not? Including the weapon.
Oh, sure.
That's gonna be yet another lightning fast game. Finally, Druid has taken a loss. I feel bad about it, but you know, at some point, I guess it had to be reflective of what we actually saw in the Swiss stats. As we saw in EU last night, Soddle and Raven were saying, let's not do Lorinda a disservice because he's actually going through all of those rounds on our behalf. Druid did have sub 50% win rates against Paladin and Shaman throughout the weekend.
Interestingly enough, though, I think that despite that final turn for Kin looking a bit weird, where he went Innovate Overflow, I think the really interesting turn there and crucial turning point is when you mentioned he should pivot away from the Eagle plan, you know, the board development plan, because he's kind of losing. He instead snapped very, very quickly, just went for the 2 Eagles on the board and was pretty drastically punished for it. And like you mentioned, it wasn't just the Serpent Shrine. There were a couple of other things, specifically the Beaming Sidekick, that could have really punished it. Do you think he should have instead, therefore, deviated over to the draw plan and try and start doing the disgustingly powerful Druid things with Mount Cellar and Glowfly?
It is hard to say for sure. I can't exactly remember what he had in hand at that point, but if there was at least one Glowfly Swarm, I would feel more inclined to save up for a big Glowfly rather than playing 2 3/2s. But I mean, it's not all bad for Kin though. He's stun in 1 right now, and with the Priest left up, they're kind of just on even ground if you consider the Mage for Posesi and the Priest for Kin as each player's respective trump card.
Yeah, if I had to wager a guess, I would say that Priest looks like the slightly stronger of the 2 at the moment. Mage, I think, is that a little bit more susceptible to the aggressive strategies, given that it's not running as much early game removal as the Priest does, doubling down on Breath of the Infinite, Holy Nova, Penance, Holy Smite. There's a whole bunch of stuff that Murlocs just cannot stand up to, no matter how hard they try. So Kin, I still feel like, is maybe ever so slightly in the lead come this, as we approach the midpoint of this series. But I guess it depends on what Posesi's strategy is in terms of which deck he doesn't want to play either. Because we've only seen him on the Shaman so far, whereas Kin, we've seen him on the Shaman and the Druid. So I wonder if Posesi is going to queue the Paladin maybe and divert away from his Druid or Mage.
We did just get, I think, some sound confirmation that it is just going to be Druid again for Kin. With a very strong opener, Fungal Fortunes on the coin. And for Posesi, none of the early Murlocs, so I'm gonna look for one of those. These are 1-drops, but not really the ones
be
he
careful
wants
what
to
you wish
see.
for.
Yeah. I said early Murlocs, not 1-drop. Toxfin is not an early Murloc. In any case, Kin has a handful of removal, and in this matchup, I can totally get behind playing Bog Beam for the full 3 mana.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you can get a War Leader off with that, laughing.
As early as that turn, I was wondering if he had any license to coin out the Fungal Fortunes. Because he also has Innervate, so if anything too threatening comes down the next turn, he could still Innervate Bog Beam if he needed to, and the Fungal gets him closer to drawing things like Wrath and Crystal Power. I feel like it's not cut and dry, just going for the end turn there.
I like your point. I think I quite drastically prefer Kin's line of play, though. That, you know, the fact that you're saving the coin, if you draw the Crystal Power a turn later, you can then just coin it out if you have to, and it just leaves you in a much more kind of diverse game plan, I feel like. Or flexible, I should say.
Yeah, I think it's largely dependent on how you view the matchup, where I guess it's a big deal that nowadays the turn 2 for Murloc Paladin isn't as strong as when they had the Rockpool Hunter.
Oh, imagine.
But yeah, it seems like of the 2-cost Murlocs, it's just Finley with the highest stat line, so not that scary.
A very underwhelming Toxfin, but I definitely like getting it down with the curve of Felfin into Scale Lord. Posesi has 1 game plan and 1 game plan only.
We did call these decks in our run of show unconventional. I messed that up. Unconventional, but one-dimensional.
Yeah.
You can kind of predict what they're gonna do every turn, or at least you know what the best play is going to be for them. So that's something that Kin has going for him, but so far, what can he actually do with this knowledge?
Yeah, this is a bit of a weird spot. He's one turn away from the, the power turn where double Bog Beam becomes active. But do you think he's going to be forced to throw one of them down early just to take off some of this pressure?
I like what he's gone for here. I was about to say, just expend one of the other spells and then draw with Fungal Fortune, see what you get from there. Because ideally, yeah, Wrath is great.
Wrath is fantastic.
Getting a Crystal Power as well, sure, why not? It's a bit scary to get rid of his one piece of healing in hand.
Yeah. And it's also scary to get Scale Lorded, because this is a lot of damage and a lot of very resilient damage as well. Now that the Moonfire has been used, there's not really all that much that Kin can do to deal with these Divine Shields effectively.
There's not. He's really looking for a Mount Seller off the top to use with these Bog Beams.
Ooh, that's a pretty big draw. How does he use that, though? If he uses it for AoE, it means everything ends up on 4 health, which is the worst possible point.
I see exactly what you mean, so I'm kind of thinking the turn starts with draw off of the Rising Winds.
Okay, fair enough. That puts him to 10 cards, so he doesn't overdraw.
Not what he wanted to see. And with 2 Murlocs on board and a War Leader coming down for the other 4 damage. Yeah, it is just game. He's even got Hand of Adal if he wants it. Or Hand of Adal plus Consecration works as well.
How did that even happen? Where did that come from? Posesi was doing like such weak stuff in the early turns. He went Hero Power on 2 and Toxfin on 1 and 3 and still somehow managed to come out in the lead. I think it's really hard to argue with Kin's game plan because he was doing such powerful stuff at every point in the way. Fungal Fortunes into Overgrowth is such a powerful game plan. But the real one turn that I'm not certain from him was where he went for the Overgrowth. Going Coin Overgrowth into 6, to be honest, doesn't really open up that much for him because, again, it's that turn away from where Bog Beams become active. So maybe instead we could have seen him just go for, I don't know, a Bog Beam on 3, just onto the Sir Finley of the Sands that was on the board, clear up some of these Murlocs and make that exact curve, or just any of the Murloc buffs, that little bit weaker.
It's a good point you bring up, but generally, my experience playing Druid at least, I feel like Coin Overgrowth, even though it's not going into the 7 mana turn, opens up way more options for you. It at least allows you to draw more if you get a Rising Winds off the top and be able to play stuff from there. I think that Kin was setting up for exactly a Mount Seller clear. He just didn't get the Mount Seller. Whether that's right or not, I couldn't tell you, but I completely understand where he's coming from at the very least.
Definitely understand where he's coming from. And to be fair, I may be letting the cast division get to me a little bit there, where I can see that he obviously has Felfin into Scale Lord, which is a very powerful curve indeed. But I feel like against these Murloc decks, as long as you're just zapping away and removing every turn, you're probably in a pretty good spot, all things considered. But now, with the 3rd attempt in a row for the Druid here for Kin, he needs to try and get a win versus the Mage, which, that's got to be easy, right? The Mage doesn't have that much removal anymore now that they're cutting Blizzards and Flame Strikes fairly commonly.
Right. The most scary thing, I suppose, is the Frost Nova, which Posesi is running Highlander Mage, none of the Scam Mage, which I've never resented Hunter Ace before, or Pheno. But for creating that deck, I feel like they deserve a little bit of black, because it's just so bad. Anyway, this is Highlander Mage, so only 1 Frost Nova available for Posesi. And I think Kin will also be very aware of the interaction with Soul of the Forest against Mage. If they do get any type of AoE, it's very important to have that insurance.
Yeah, there's a lot of interactions to know. First of all, I will just say that even though, as I said, a lot of the Mage lists are cutting Flame Strike, and to a lesser extent Blizzard, Posesi's got both. This is a list full of AoE, and in addition to that, we see the Waste Warden. And despite what you may think, Treants seem like a minion type, absolutely. they are not technically a minion type. They're just called, their name is Treant. They don't have a tag at the bottom that says Treant. So Waste Warden, which does 3 damage to a minion and all others of the same type, cannot target Treants, but it can attack the Glowfly Swarm, all of which are beasts. So that is potentially for posesi, that little bit of extra removal that will get him over the finish line.
Right, and I think this is very good deck building once again from posesi. I at least praised his build of Shaman and his build of Druid going into this in particular, and knowing that he's leaving Druid up after the ban phase, I think it makes a lot of sense to tech the Mage this way. And now that kind of makes me wonder whether posesi had to leave up particularly the Mage from posesi, or whether he thought he could just get a win in with the Druid versus the other decks.
Maybe, yeah. But now that we're done with the setup turns in which neither player interacts with the opponent very much, they focus on their own game plan, drawing, ramping, whatever it may be. This is where we enter crunch time. Kin left with a bit of a rough choice here, to be perfectly honest. Obviously, he wants to get down the overflow, I think it's fair to say, as soon as possible. How does he go about that? Is it ever worth it to just tank the overdraw and cast it anyway?
That's what I'm thinking. He's got 8 in hand now, so even if he expends the Innervate, he'll still be overdrawing 1. And then another after the next turn if he doesn't get exactly Moonfire or the other Innervate. Kin is going to be very disciplined here. I'm not sure about this.
I guess the thinking is that, just casting Overflow straight up, I think is too much overdraw to really consider. You're not really getting yourself an advantage. But double Power of the Wild first, that doesn't seem much better. You're using 2 of your best cards to go for lethal on basically nothing.
Yeah, I see what you mean. The benefit is essentially gaining you 3 cards to play next turn.
Yeah.
I tend not to think of what is actually being tossed from the deck in matchups where you're the aggressor. But in this matchup, maybe Kin is thinking, yes, he's the aggressor, but it could go longer where he needs every bit of refill available because posesi is running more AoE than usual.
Yeah, that's right. I think Ysera could be absolutely crucial. posesi deciding to let rip with the escaped Mana Saber here to get down Tiamat on turn 5, a truly terrifying prospect for the Druid. But the 6 health with Divine Shield with Fog Beam active is thankfully not too difficult to answer.
Right. He drew the Fungal Fortunes, thankfully for Kin, because that turn would have been very awkward with the rest of the mana because he couldn't have expended the Wrath and then played Overflow because that would heal the Tiamat, and he wanted to create that hand space.
I actually really like this decision as well from Kin because despite the fact that it happened really, really fast there, I believe he had the mana to go Glowfly Innovate Wrath and kill the Tiamat whilst also developing a board of 2/2s, which at first glance sounds fantastic. But I think this play, if I'm not mistaken, looks like if he's allowed to, trying to set up a Soul of the Forest as well with this Glowfly Swarm, which, as you were just talking about at the start, feels very powerful.
Right. Unfortunately for Kin, even if he commits both Power of the Wild, that inclusion of Flame Strike for posesi is going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was talking about the Soul of the Forest. This effectively plays around Blizzard as well. He just didn't want to walk directly into a Blizzard on turn 6. He's wondering about committing the second Power of the Wild because it's an interesting balance here, right? We're at 3 health. It's playing around Blizzard because his board doesn't die, but it's also playing around Flame Strike because he hasn't overcommitted the second Power of the Wild. So I actually really like holding back the second one here and only using 1.
Right, I think it was absolutely clear to Kin that he wanted to leave everything except the 4/6 at 3 health. The consideration was whether he just wanted to spend another card because it's looking like after this board gets cleared, he absolutely needs to go for the Overflow. And posesi here, going for the Dragon Caster with the Flame Strike, I think makes a whole lot of sense. Because he's actually putting even more pressure onto the board than a Waste Warden would have.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's giving Kin no time to hesitate.
Yeah, Kin's got to be careful. posesi is approaching just Zephyrus lethal in the next couple of turns, giving him a Bloodlust or Savage or whatever it may be that's needed. So Kin's going to have to start playing on the defensive, which he can do here to an extent with healing off the Overflow and drawing towards his power cards in the in the exotic Mount Seller.
Right. Mount Seller and Ysera is also included in the top end for Kin.
Okay.
So once again, pretty difficult to toss any of these. Maybe he just plays the Crystal Power to damage something, and then a Rising Winds for a 3/2. Because the Rising, I think, is still Twin Spell.
He could potentially go Innovate Overgrowth, which gives him a 0 mana excess mana, which he could then not cast and save it for when he gets the Mount Seller.
Or also just after Ysera is played. I kind of like that.
Yeah. That's true, actually. Yeah, that might give a dragon off the top.
But this from Kin, I feel, is a bit precarious because both the Mount Sellers are still in the deck.
Life and hope.
Speaking of precarious, this could just be a lethal setup.
Whoa!
Hey, have a Ysera for yourself, Posesi. My goodness. He cut it from his Druid, but apparently it's here for his Mage.
Yeah. This is just what Mage does best. A turn before he should even be allowed to play it. And Ysera can still
Alex
come down.
Straza. This is just the perfect Mage game from Posesi.
I'm pretty sure you just play it here for Posesi.
My hand is too full.
I don't even know what he's afraid of. The only thing he could possibly be afraid of is a huge Mount Seller turn, against which he needs lethal with Zephyrus, but I don't think that's going to matter either way. This is just so clearly lethal for Posesi.
Right. Even without the Alex in hand, he's showing 21 on board, so he needs either Rush or Taunt Dragons to even survive from Kin's perspective.
I concede.
A good effort.
Lightning fast there.
Yeah, very, very fast indeed. And congratulations to Posesi, our winner of this series. The Druid, for the first time this weekend, is looking absolutely dreadful. That was a 3-0 sweep, or an 0-3 sweep, I suppose I should say, on the Druid there by the Shaman, Paladin, and the Mage. It was, to be fair, a very, very powerful hand for the Mage against the Druid. It had all the threats as well as all the removal it could possibly need against what Kin was throwing down. But what is it that's changed, Gia, today that's making Druid look so much worse?
Well, maybe not much has changed, and this is the actual average outcome. I don't see anything that I particularly disliked among the lines that Kin went for, except for maybe holding on to Overflow a bit too long. I'm not entirely sure about that one, but it felt like the turn of just Hero Power Pass was very, very vulnerable to any type of pressure from the Mage, and Posesi did have exactly that. Can't say for sure, but Kin is not out of it just yet.
That's absolutely right. As we can take a look at the bracket, we can see where Kin is sitting now. I believe that this would be... Oh no, I was going to say it would be his third top 8 in a row, but not making top 4. I believe that's not quite. But either way, going down to the elimination match now. He's still in with a chance of getting through to the decider match a little bit later on today, and then in the second place spot. But for Posesi, it's looking like yet another dominant week for him, and also for Japan, with Glory going through in first place in Division or Bracket A. Now Posesi is looking prime position to get there and join him.
Yeah, potentially even all 3 Japanese players in the top 4 if Alutamu manages to take a win over Blurry and make it through. Well, if that happens, it will have to be Alutamu versus Posesi. Yeah, either one of them. But yeah, it's just incredible from Japan, and Posesi can't quite overtake points, but Kin still has that small potential to tie Surrender at the very least.
Yeah, if he gets a very impressive performance indeed. And to be fair, like we were saying, I think we can agree with the majority of his lines there over the course of the game. The couple of minor disagreements I might have, or at least ideas he could have explored with different lines, involve, just being a bit more focused on killing off the Paladin's board, and maybe being, weirdly enough, less focused on killing off the Shaman's board by not developing the Eagles and instead starting to draw through to his more powerful cards. But I realize it sounds a little bit inconsistent. It's a very, very difficult matchup to play with the Druid up against these aggro decks.
Yeah, I think it's all about recognizing when you can go for the board plan and when you have to go for the Mount Seller plan. And
Yep.
it doesn't always pan out because you can't tell whether your opponent has a handful of minions or a handful of removal. And Kin walked into the removal hand, unfortunately for him, but still well played on both ends. Really liked what I saw from Posesi as well.
Yeah.
And maybe these players are going at it a little bit quicker than usual because there's less to play for, at least in terms of division placements. But I still think we're going to have a good show in for us between Alutemu and Flurry, with all 4 of the same classes left out.
I think so as well. Alutemu was, in my opinion, probably the best player we saw in Season 1 specifically of